Improve your art skills 100%. Is it possible? Yes, it is, and it's easy too. In today's video, we're going to talk psychology. I'm also going to give you some practical tips. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Michelle. On this channel, you'll find all things watercolour as well as drawing tuition, mixed media, even a little bit of business and motivation for artists too. Please do consider subscribing. If you click the bell icon, you can get notified every time I have a new video for you. I make at least one free video a week here on YouTube on a Thursday with extra content for Patreon subscribers. Now, you may have heard the expression, don't sweat the small stuff, and in this video I'm going to encourage you to think about that small stuff, and we're going to look at the psychology of learning and a really easy way of improving your art skills really quickly. I've been teaching people in the real world for 20 years, and one thing I've come across time and time again is this kind of this idea of sort of almost ignoring small things. So, looking at things like, quality of paper, cleaning palettes, all of that basic, really boring stuff that anyone can do and is really quite easy. People sort of say to me, look, changing my water more often isn't going to make any difference. I'm trying to draw a cow and it looks like a pig. That small stuff, that's of no use to me. It really doesn't make any difference. I'm just not very good. People will also come into my art classes, say it's not worth me having good materials. It really isn't. I'm so bad at art, I'd just be wasting money. So in this video, I want to talk about that idea of these things that actually don't require any level of skill and how much they can actually up your game, especially when you start painting. And I want to get you out of this mindset of I'm a beginner, so those things don't matter. Now, years ago, I read a book and it was a Robin Sharma book. He's kind of a business guru, a motivational speaker, and he introduced me to the concept. I don't know if it's his concept, so I will credit him with it, but it may be that he was just repeating, because a lot of these ideas are universal and they go between different mentors and different tutors. So he talked about something called BIW, best in world, and he spoke about this idea of everything you do trying to be the best in the world at it. Now, of course, that's not realistic. If we try to be the best in the world at something, we're going to fail because we're probably not good enough. But just the idea of aiming high. So, for instance, if you aim up here, you'll probably get here, whereas if you aim down here, probably going to get very low down indeed. So talking about this idea of aiming to be the best in the world, and it's something that I took on board with everything that I did. Now, I want you to understand early on in this video, I'm not talking about buying expensive materials. This is absolutely not what this video is about. So if you're watching all of this and I start talking about materials and you start thinking, well, I can't afford the most expensive paper in the world, I can't afford the best paints in the world, that's not what this is about, because the idea of best in the world is very distinct to you. It's very much what you feel is the best in the world, not what society feels is the best in the world. For instance, you might look at the best car in the world and you might think to yourself, what's the best car in the world? And there are cars out there that cost millions, but perhaps your dream has always been to have a little red Mini or a Land Rover. So the best in the world isn't necessarily the most expensive in the world or the hardest to come by. So it's the idea of having internal standards and having your own standards. For instance, when I set up my first art class, I thought to myself, what would the best art class in the world be, and what would it be like, and what would it have? Now, imagine I decided to myself that the best art class in the world would have music. That's not very expensive to provide at all. Perhaps the best art class in the world has biscuits. That's not very expensive at all to provide. But just this idea of giving yourself standards and trying to reach high with everything you do can really transform your work. And I want to talk now about this idea of taking care of small things in order to get bigger wins. Now, there's an idea with the, within the art world that really good artists, it's all a bit hippie, isn't it? It's all a bit sort of, they're waiting for the muse, and they're waiting for sort of the talent and the inspiration, and it's all of this, and it's much more about that than about practical skills. But if you look at other areas where people excel, for instance, sports, if you think about sportsmen, they really look at every little detail. And if you've ever seen a sports coach interviewed on the TV, or if you've listened to top sportsmen talking, you'll understand that they do everything. I mean, I remember watching a documentary about tennis player Andy Murray, and he has these punishing sort of ice baths after every session. Now, this is not something that costs a lot of money, but he puts himself through it because he knows it'll just give him that tiny edge It's why sportsmen are often caught doing these dodgy practices, taking sort of a little bit of drugs or, having their blood transfused or something like this. They adjust everything, they think about, if they're cyclists, they think about the bike and they make these tiny adjustments. They spend ages getting the tyre depth just right. All of these things that sportsmen do. And I want to talk to you as well about this idea of there being two ways of achieving a level of skill in any practice. So let's think about artistic skills or sports skills or singing or dancing, anything at all. Let's think about what is involved in that. So there's two things that are involved. There are the hard things, the things that require skill, and then there are the easy things. So let's look at an Olympic swimmer, for instance. One of the hard things would be, improving their stroke. This is something they work on with their coach. There are no shortcuts to it. They just have to do it. It's the same when we have to learn to paint and to draw. These are things that require a lot of effort and a lot of skill. But one thing that you'll have noticed that all competitive swimmers have is they all wear swim hats, don't they? They don't have their hair just loose like mine is now, because it was discovered long ago that the sleeker they are, the more aerodynamic they are as they go through the water, the better it is for them. So they all wear a swim hat. And these are not expensive. Swim hats are probably only a few pounds, a few dollars, but it's something that they all do. This is something that requires no skill. It doesn't require any skill to put a swim hat on. Now, there are lots of things in art as well that don't require any skill, and yet beginners tend to miss them out. So I'm going to go through a list of them in a minute, and we're going to look at these actual sort of real skills. And there are many more than I can fit into this video, and there are many that I have spoken about in other videos. I'm just going to give you an overview today. But I want you to stop discounting these small wins, because they really, really add up. And I want you to think, it's one of the first things that I thought about when I started working as an artist. I looked around for all of the things that I could do to improve my art that didn't require any talent and didn't require any skill, because those are the easy things, those are the easy wins. And although you may not see any immediate improvement in your work just by doing one of these things, these tiny things all add up, and they can add up to a big improvement in your work. And one of the ways that you can manifest this big improvement is to think about that best in the world idea. So when you're choosing a pencil, what is the best pencil in the world? If you needed a brush holder, what would the best brush holder in the world look like? It doesn't mean you have to go out and buy the most expensive brush holder in the world. It might be something that you could make by taping together cereal packets. It would just be something that was functional and that helped you to work. What's the best lighting in the world? What is the best paper? Now, many people would say the best paper for painting watercolours on is Archie's watercolour paper. That doesn't mean it's the best in the world for you as an individual. I don't get on with painting on Archie's watercolour paper. I don't like it very much. For me, it's not the best in the world. So as I said, it's not about the most expensive. It's about what is the best for you. And as a complete beginner, I do not encourage you to buy the most expensive materials anyway, but you do need a certain quality, otherwise it begins to negatively affect your work. So think always about this best in the world concept. Think about it for everything you do and every item you own that is to do with your painting practice or your drawing practice or your hobby. Think about all of the things that you can do that don't require any skill whatsoever, and if you start adding those small wins up, they will help you to become a much better artist. So we talked in the beginning of this concept of improving your art by 100%. So let's have a think about this. So I'm going to just throw some sort of arbitrary measurements out there just to get the idea in your head. So these don't actually represent anything, but it's just to put the idea of how this can work in your head. So let's say that the best painting, if you were the best painter in the world, your painting would score 100. So let's look at your current skill level, and let's imagine that you're only at 20. So you're at 20 and you're aiming for 100. You won't ever get there, but if you got to 80, you'd be really pleased, wouldn't you? So you're at 20 and you're aiming for 100. So you've got 80 to go. So let's imagine that half of that is skill, so half of that is really, really difficult stuff that you've got to learn, you've got to improve to get that extra 40 points. And let's look at the other half, that other 40, that other half of the 80 that you need to get to 100. And let's say that that other 40 is easy stuff. It's stuff that requires no skill whatsoever. It's just a little bit of thought and a little bit of effort to make sure that you're doing those things. Now, you probably won't be able to do all of those things because, again, most of us don't make it to 100. But what if you only managed to do half of those things? So we started at a skill level of 20. We're going for 100. That leaves 80. 40 is stuff that takes skill. 40 is stuff that doesn't take skill. You can only get maybe half of that done. So there you've got 20. So you were at 20, now you're at 40, and there is your 100% increase. You have literally doubled the quality of your artwork just by paying a little bit more attention and having patience and thinking about this idea of best in the world and really trying to improve every aspect of your artistic practice. So much for theory. I'm going to now give you 8 real-life practices that you can use to see a huge improvement in the quality of your artwork. So let's get started with the first thing that you can do to lead to a really big improvement in your artwork. So tip number 1 is I want you to use good quality materials. Now, as I spoke about earlier, this does not mean buying the most expensive paints, brushes and paper in the world. It just means the right quality materials for this stage that you are at. Now, obviously, as a beginner, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So I don't encourage you to buy, complete top of the range unless you can afford it. Now, if you can afford it, if you are, fairly wealthy and you don't have to worry about these things, then sure, buy the best that you can afford, because it's only going to help to get your work to a higher level quicker. However, if you're not in that happy band of people that can afford to spend any amount of money on art materials, then I encourage you just to get reasonable quality students' materials and not to buy very cheap materials. Don't do yourself a disservice. Remember that the quality of the art materials will negatively affect how you work with them. Imagine you take one of those really terrible little paintbrushes from a children's art set and try and paint with it. It would be impossible, wouldn't it? You can't produce anything reasonable with those sort of paintbrushes. So it will negatively affect your work if you are using a quality that is too low. So it's not about buying the most expensive in the world, but I do want you to make sure that you have good quality materials. Never feel that you're not worth it because you're a beginner. If you ever want to progress beyond being a beginner, you're going to need to use decent quality materials. Number 2 is prepare your art surfaces properly. Now, I mostly teach watercolours, so I'm going to speak about watercolour painting here, but really it goes for every medium. Make sure that the surface you're working on has been properly prepared and don't skimp this. So if you are a watercolour artist, I do suggest that you stretch your paper. Now, I know I'm going to get a million comments from people saying don't bother stretching your paper, but it is just my opinion that you will paint better on stretched paper. If you don't want to stretch your paper, you need to use a block or what they call a gummed pad, and this will give you a good surface to work on. Now, although I'm talking about watercolours here, it goes for anything. For instance, if you're doing printmaking and you know that you need to soak your paper for half an hour before you use it, don't skimp that step. If you know that you need to prepare your canvas with a certain amount of layers of undercoat or whatever it is that you're putting on your canvas, don't skimp that step. Don't be thinking ever to yourself, it doesn't matter because I'm not good enough. I want you to make sure that you prepare the surface that you're going to work on properly. At number 3, I want you to work cleanly. I want you to keep your palette clean. I want you to keep your water clean. I want you to keep your mixing wells clean and your paints clean. This is really important. It doesn't matter what medium you're working in. Of course, there's always a certain amount of paint mixing and there's always a certain amount of mess involved with creating art. One thing that I like to do is every time I get to the end of a painting, I like to clean my palette. Never leave your paints in a dirty mess. Never leave your palette in a dirty mess. Even if it's dried, if it's something like acrylics and it's completely dried and you can mix on top, just seeing that colour underneath is going to affect your eye. You're not going to be able to see to mix the colours properly. It's really important that you work cleanly and don't let your paints just get polluted and mucky and dirty. Don't let your water become the colour of soup. This stuff is really important. It's really important that anything you place on your work looks clean and is cleanly mixed. It's going to make a big improvement to the finished quality of your artwork. Try to get into the habit of always working cleanly. At this point, if you're enjoying this video, can I please ask you, as always, to click that thumbs up, that like button, please. YouTube rewards channels with audience interaction. I'm almost at 50k subscribers at the time of making this video. So if you like, share, subscribe, or even leave me a comment, YouTube will push this video out to more people and I can help teach more people how to paint. This next one is a big one, and this is plan your composition. It's a step that many beginners miss, and yet no professional artist would consider starting without planning their composition and thinking about their layout. But if you're a beginner, especially if you're just painting or drawing one item, it's so easy to just start. I mean, I've got it in a drawing video that I'll link to at the end of this video. It's a really big mistake that people make, is just sort of starting drawing in the middle of the paper without really any thought to how big or small things are going to be, or what side that they're sitting on, or just how the layout looks generally. So always think about the composition of your work before you start. And if you're doing something like a landscape, you might want to do some thumbnail sketches and consider various ideas. What does it look like with the horizon moved up or moved down? Should that house be in the center? Should I move it over to the side? The good thing about being an artist is you don't have to slavishly follow the photograph or what's in front of you. If something will look better in a different position, you don't have to have a huge understanding of composition, although I do have videos on this channel about composition mistakes and things like that if you want to look at those. But you don't even have to sort of understand all of that. Just have a play around with it. Just move things around a little bit on your sketchpad and think about how things are going to look before you start your final painting. Don't commit yourself to a piece of artwork when you've no real idea of how it's going to look at the end. This next one is huge. Take your time over your drawing. I see this so often. I've taught so many art classes where people will just spend 5 minutes on their drawing and then launch in with the painting. They're almost at the end of doing the painting stage and they'll say to me, oh Michelle, look at this. I don't know what to do about this. You know, what can I do about this? And I'll say to them, there's absolutely nothing you can do about that because there's nothing wrong with the painting. The problem was your underdrawing. So really make sure you're happy with your underdrawing before you start painting. Now, an underdrawing may be very complex. It may actually be very simple and just very few lines. Depends on what you're painting and what your medium is, but it's so important that you get it right. Let me assure you that a good painting has never come from a bad drawing. If you don't like the drawing, you're not going to like the painting. Nothing is ever improved by adding colour to it. So really take time over your drawing. Now, I'm someone that doesn't really enjoy drawing for the sake of drawing. I want to get onto the painting stage, so I really understand that that is hard for some people. But do make sure your underdrawing is correct, because otherwise you condemn your painting to being a bad painting before you've even started applying any colour. The next tip I have for you is to step away from your work from time to time. Now, with watercolour painting, it's really important that several stages of your painting, and I can't tell you what they are, it depends on what you're painting and in what style, but at several stages in your painting, you're going to need to let it dry or just walk away from it. And even if things are going okay and you don't need to let it dry, I do suggest you stop now and again, take a break from it and walk away from it. One of the things that I have found that is very prevalent in amateur artists is that everything has to be done quickly. They start the painting and within 2 hours it's finished. Professional artists don't do that at all. We may spend hours just thinking about something. We may just think, I'm not quite sure where to go with this now. I'm going to put it aside for a few hours and look at it again later. There's a real thing that happens when you step away from a picture and you come back to it. You instantly get to see what it needs because you get perspective. You get that sort of distance from your work. You've been looking at it for so long up close. You've failed to understand what it needs next, or where the mistakes are, or where it might be going wrong, or what it needs. Step away from your work from time to time. Don't rush your work. If you're not sure where you're going with it or what to do to it next, step away from it, even leave it overnight and look at it again. Take time over your work, have patience with it. Most artwork looks a bit rubbish halfway through, so don't lose heart and don't start getting to that attitude of, oh well, I've messed it up now, it doesn't matter now. Take time over your work, step away from it, put full effort, best in the world effort into every part of your painting, including the end, because it is very common that halfway through you may not like what you're producing, but keep the faith, keep working on it, keep trying to make that painting the best in the world, and you may be pleasantly surprised when you get to the end. So the next tip I have for you is to analyse your work when it's finished. This is so important. Now, this is a much bigger concept than I really have time to speak about in this video, but luckily for you I have already made a video about this, and it talks about the concept of deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice is used by businessmen, it's used by sports people, it's used by musicians. You will have come across it if you've ever had golf lessons and your coach has asked you to spend time working on that particular part of your golf swing that isn't working properly. So deliberate practice is basically the idea of analysing everything you do and making those small improvements. As I said, it's a big concept to talk about in this video. I've already made a video about it, so I'm going to link to that in the information cards up above. If it doesn't show on your device, because they don't show on all devices, I'll link to it in the description of this video as well. So when you get to the end of a painting, I want you to think very carefully about what was right about that painting, what you loved about that painting, and what was wrong about that painting. You need to be thinking then about how you achieved the things that went right and how you could improve upon the things that were wrong. If you just keep mindlessly working again and again and again, it's like a golfer keep working on their swing without ever stopping to analyse what's going wrong, without ever getting any coaching, or even just perhaps thinking about it themselves and trying to figure out what's going wrong. It's like that. If you just keep practicing without any kind of analysis, then you may not improve at all. So when you get to the end of your painting, I want you to consider what was right about it and what went wrong with it, and then you have a roadmap for improvement. So I've got that video on deliberate practice, so do have a look at that after you watch this video, and that will help you with your analysis of your work when it's complete. This is something all professional artists do. We don't just mindlessly produce one piece of work and then shove it aside in disgust and go on to the next one. We stop and think about what we're happy with and what we are not so happy with. So my next tip is all about doing the things that you don't want to do. So I want you to do the things that you find boring and the things that you find difficult. Now this may be as simple as spending ages making colour charts of all your paints. You think to yourself, oh, have I really got to do this? I mean, some people enjoy it, don't they? But some people just find it tiresome. But it's about that concept that we talked about at the beginning. It's about doing all the things that don't take any level of skill, and how these will build up and add up to much better artwork. So whatever it is that you need to do, whether it's cleaning your palette or learning about perspective or changing your water for the 15th time in your painting, I want you to take the time to do all of those things that you find boring, that you find difficult, because that really, really is the only way to improve. Now, do you think that tennis player Andy Murray likes sitting in baths of ice after he's finished a match? He absolutely hates it, no doubt, but he has to do it because he knows that it'll give him a faster recovery time. So it's not all about pleasure with art. I mean, the most pleasure that you get from art is producing a good piece of work. And sometimes on the way to doing that, you have to do a little bit of stuff that's boring or uninteresting or time consuming, or that you just aren't very interested in. Now, one of the things that I do in my spare time is martial arts. So there's a thing that happens with things like kicks and punches when you practice, and you practice too much on one side of your body. So we're all right or left-handed, we're also right or left-legged. So what can happen is that if you know that you're much better at doing a kick on your right leg, when you do a kick on your left leg, it's hopeless, you can't get very high and you lose balance. Of course, you're more inclined to practice those kicks on your right leg because your ego says, oh, look at me, I'm good at kicking, I can do this wonderful kick with my right leg. So you keep training on your right leg, and so the kicks on your left leg become even worse because you're not practicing on your left side. It's the same with art. You need to practice the stuff you're not good at. It's almost a roadmap for success. Think about things that you're not good at. Think about things that are boring. Think about the stuff you don't want to do. Those may possibly be the things that you need to practice. So there are things within your own artwork and your own practice that you should be doing. They're probably quite easy things, but you just don't want to do them. So I want to encourage you to do those things. So do let me know in the comments if any of the things I've spoken about in this video resonated with you, or if you're going to try any of the tips that I have given you for improvement. Now, if you do need more formal help with your work, particularly your watercolour painting or your watercolour pencils, I have some really good courses for you. I'll link to those in the description of this video. You can also get extra content and watch me work on my own artwork on Patreon. I also have some free downloadable PDFs that you can grab for no money whatsoever. All of those good things are in the video description, as is my Facebook group. Do consider popping over to join us. Now, I spoke earlier in this video about the importance of drawing skills and how it's really important and it underpins everything that you do. If you find that you struggle with your drawing, I have a great video for you. It's going to tell you the 10 most common mistakes that beginners are making when learning to draw. You can watch that video right now.